I am live. Sweet. I must grab something. It's important. Whew. Got it. Very, very important indeed. The jewel. Hello, my lovely little jack-lantern, and welcome to another live stream, where today we are entering the Siren's Call, Book 2 audiobook, Chapter 8, 9, and 10, and Part 6, We Are Slaves in a Dutch Colony. This will probably not be as long, maybe an hour at most. It is 1:45 right now, so should be kicking off soon. So yeah, I decided to do a stream this afternoon. Thought it'd be nice. Yeah. So I already have it pulled up. We are 6 hours in the audiobook right now out of 19. Perfect. Hola. ¿Cómo estás? Yeah, I got 5 likes on it, which is on my girlfriend. My girlfriend is my #1 supporter on my channel. I love it so much. She is adorable. Stream. All right. So, I mean, I'm ready whenever you guys are. I mean, there's no explanation needed. We know what's happened up to this point. So, let's get into it. So, Part 6, We Are Slaves in a Dutch Colony. Here we go. Late August 1680 on the grounds of JabberWocky Estate. 1 sec, I'm going to actually follow along in the book. Okay. Slave away.
Balanced on a high scaffolding on the unfinished wall eastern bastion of the castle. This was only the second day of the labours we had endured, that would be of the rest of our natural lives. After that day in the Dutch court, we were dragged to this magic land of Velda. They held us here in our own iron cells for the night, and this was the day that the work really began as slaves in the Dutch colony. That night before, they had beaten Will and Daniel and fired a musket head ball into Daniel's chest, but it traveled deep into his heart, so he wouldn't die from it. My palms on my hands and both my shoulders were rubbed raw by the ropes and the rough, undressed stone blocks. One of my fingertips was crushed, and the nail was the color of a purple grape, and I couldn't feel it anymore, and it happened when a slab fell on it. Each masonry block weighed a ton or more and had to be manhandled up the rickety scaffolding of bamboo poles and planks. And the gang of us convicts working with me was Daniel and Finn. They had really given us a good beating, and it was clear that it had shown that our bodies were lined with scars, bruises, and bumps. The clothes they gave us were smelly and raggedy, only dirty white cotton shirts and wool breeches, and some didn't even have boots. Other white slavers were sold into this life of slavery from the governor. From England to France to Austria to Africa to Scotland, where many slavers alike working. The musket ball in Daniel's chest had left a deep, dark purple crater and a lion's claw across his back from when a soldier had slashed him with an iron mallet. He was beat for his strong self. The scabs on his body were weeping, watery, blood-tingled lips. Finn seemed okay other than a few bruises, but the worst that had gotten him was Daniel, Tim, and Will. I gazed across the grassy courtyard through the steaming sun to see Tim, Will, and Jeb lifting up big stone blocks, huffing after letting go of one. They had beaten and slashed Tim with a dagger, making him holler to the heavens with a small sword. The sword wound crawled like a raw red vine around Tim's left thigh, and Tim had a limp now as he moved along the scaffold. After not eating for a few days, we had not an ounce of fat on. We were as lean as hunting dogs, and stringy muscle and bone stood out clearly beneath our sun-reddened skins. This was terrible and torture to any man, and now, with Tim and Will here, who were hoping they'd rescue us, we were at a loss at what to do. I wish Marquis and Cortez were here, I frowned sadly to myself. Though the sun shined brightly, the winter wind whistled in from the northwest and seemed to abrade our bodies like ground glass. In unison, me, Dan, and Finn hauled at the tail of the heavy manual rope, and the sheaves screeched in their blocks as the great yellow lump of stone lifted from the truck of the wagon, far below, and began its perilous ascent up the high structure. The day before, the scaffolding in the sub-basin had collapsed under the weight of stones and hurled 3 poor bastards working upon it to the death on the cobbles far below. The dog guard, Hugo Bernard, the overseer, had muttered as he stood over their crushed corpses. 3 birds in 1 stone. I'll have the next careless bastard that kills himself thrashed within an inch of his life, and burst out laughing at his own gallows humor. Daniel took a turn of the rope end round his good shoulder and angled it as the rest of us reached out to the swinging block and hauled it into the trestle. This is devil's work. I can't be a slave. Curse that nasty Dutch governor. He ain't even fit for that title. Daniel grumbled after heaving the big stone up. I agree, but we can't do anything about it now. We must sit tight, survive, and wait for our opportunity, I groaned. Aye, if we even get a window, we are watched by every eye here, lads, Finn sadly said. I gazed across the yard to see Tim lift the ropes up, and Jeb and Will struggled to lift the rocks. Between us, we manhandled it into a gap at the top of the wall, with the Dutch stonemason in his leather apron shouting instructions at us, but it was hard to read because of his accent. We let go of the ropes once the rock was in place, and I heaved in a draught of air, breathing heavily and sweating from the nasty work. We 3 stood there panting, every muscle in my body aching and trembling, but we had no time to rest. I could hear below the courtyard Hugo Bernard yelling, "Get that cradle down here! Swiftly now, I'll come up and give you a touch of the persuader." And I saw him flick out the knotted leather thongs of his whip. Fuck that guard, Finn muttered. He's a nasty one, ain't he? I snickered. Daniel peered over my shoulder at the edge of the scaffold. Suddenly he stiffened. There they go. I stepped beside him and looked down. From the doorway to the dungeon, a small procession emerged. I watched Ka and other black men were led out into the wintry sunshine. Once again, they were wearing light chains. Look at those lucky blackies, Finn growled. They had not been included in our labor teams, but had stayed in the dungeon, resting and being fed an extra meal each day to fatten them up while they waited to go on the auction block. This morning, the mason had ordered the black men to be stripped naked. Then Dr. Czar, the company surgeon, had come down to the cell and examined them, probing and peering into their ears and mouths to satisfy himself as to the state of their health. When the surgeon had left, the mason ordered them to anoint themselves all over from a stone jar of oil. Now their skins shone in the sunlight like polished ebony. Though they were still lean and finely drawn from their stay, the coating oil made them appear sleek, prime specimens of humanity. Now they were being led out through the gates of the castle onto the open parade, where already a crowd had gathered. Before he passed through the gates, Ka raised his great round head and looked at all of us, nodded, and strode on through. Take a measly break, pirates, from the sun, Hugo blurted from the top of the trestle. No lollygagging now. Me, Dan, Finn, Tim, Jeb, and Will all dropped our ropes and scurried to a high point of the castle walls to see the auction block beyond the walls. We climbed up and dropped our legs over the edge as we helped Tim scramble up from his limp leg. You think Ka will be sold? Tim asked Jeb. Perhaps, he said, worried. He's a strong, hard-working gent, so it's not impossible. I'm worried he will. Let's pray he won't be, Will muttered. We need him. He's one of us. Aye, he is, I smiled. Look, they're starting the bidding, Daniel said, pointing to the auction block. I gazed down there and could see people from the court we had 2 days ago. Cornelius Schroeder, the sly little dog, basking in the sun, as well as Jacobus Hop, the nervous clerk. The auction block was a temporary structure that at other times was used as a gibbet on which the corpses of executed criminals were placed for public view. The 4 men were lined up on the platform, and Dr. Zor mounted the platform with them and addressed the crowd. I have examined all of the 4 slaves being offered for sale today, he stated, lowering his head to peer over the tops of his wire-framed eyeglasses. I can give the assurance that all of them are in good health. Their eyes and teeth are sound, and they are hale and lemon body. The crowd was in a festive mood, it seemed. They clapped at the doctor's announcement and gave him an ironical cheer as he climbed down from the block and hurried back towards the castle gates. Jacobus Hop stepped forward and held up a hand for silence. Then he read from the proclamation of the sale, the crowd jeering and imitating him every time he stuttered. By order of His Excellency, the governor of this colony of the Honorable Dutch East India Company, I am authorized to offer for sale to the highest bidder 4 Negro slaves. He broke off and removed his hat respectively as the governor's carriage came down the avenue from the residence, passing through the gardens and wheeling out onto the open parade behind the 6 glossy greys. In the carriage sat Vandervelita, his fat self. The crowd opened to let the carriage come to the foot of the block, where a coloured coachman under the name of Fredricus called the team to a halt and wound up down the handbrake as the horses snorted. The maid that had questioned me in the court and lied about me raping her was there too. I learned only the day before that the maid was one of Vandervelita's prized mistresses, and she was well adored by the colony. They both did not exit the carriage, and the maid lolled elegantly on a leather seat, twirling her parcel and chatting gaily to her money provider and her lover. "Oi, look, there's the damn maid that lied about you, Henry," Dan said. "I see that. She's nothing more than Van's pet," I growled. On the platform, I noticed Hop was thrown into confusion by the arrival of these exalted visitors and stood flushing, stammering, and blinking in the sunlight until Schroeder called, "Get on with it, fellow! We didn't come here to watch you goggle and gape." My brow creased, seeking that wretched man in the crowd, the lying traitor. Hop replaced his hat and bowed at Schroeder, then at the maid and the governor. He raised his voice. "The first lot is the slave Ka. He's about 35 years of age and is believed to be a member of the Kwandia tribe from the east coast of Africa. As you are aware, the Kwanda Negroes are much appreciated as field slaves and herdsmen. He can also be trained into an excellent wagon driver or coachman." He paused to mop his sweaty face and gather his tripping tongue, then went on. "Ka is said to be a skilled hunter and fisherman who would bring in great income to his owner from any of these occupations." "Damn cheeseheads," Jeb growled. "Good. Ka, steer strong, will ya?" "Let's hope they don't sell him, Jeb," I said. "Sir Hop, are you hiding anything from us?" The maid shot out at Hop, and once again he was thrown into confusion. "That maid, she seems to be a feisty one, don't you think?" Daniel asked. "I think so," Tim said. "Do you know her name?" I asked. "I do. I learned her name was Katina. Well, that's what Vandervelita calls her. She's his housemaid now, and mistress," Will added. Hop's stammer was so agonized he could hardly get out the words. "Reverend lady, greatly esteemed lady," he spread his hands helplessly. "I assure you, would you offer for sale a bull wearing clothes?" Katina demanded. "Do you expect us to bid for something that we cannot see?" "She's a nutcase," Jeb said. Jeb was right about that. This woman not only lied about me raping her, she was obsessed with the thought of sexing up. "This Hop lad is a nervous Nelly," I muttered as Dan nodded, as we sat atop of the castle walls, legs dangling, looking below. Hop got onto her meaning. "Disrobe!" He ordered loudly to bolster his courage while facing this huge and wild savage. For a moment, Carr stared at him, unmoving, then slipped the knot off his loincloth and let it fall to the plains under his feet. Naked, he stared over their heads to the sea. "How could they do this to a man?" Jeb frowned. "I don't view him as one," Daniel worryingly said. There was a hissing in the crowd. One woman squealed and another giggled, but none turned their eyes away. "Hoots!" I heard Avery's voice crackle the pause. "The buyer would be getting a full measure. There's no make weight in that load of blood sausage. I'll start the bidding at 500 guilders. My rage boiled to my head seeing that traitor.
Yes.
"Traitor," I heard Tim growl. "He'll get his," Daniel mumbled. I knew they were right. We will get him, no matter how long it takes. "And 100 more!" Katina screamed happily. Avery glanced at her. "I did not know you were intending to bid, madam." "I will have this one at any price," she warned him sweetly, "for he amuses me." "I will never stand in the way of a beautiful lady." Avery bowed, backing away from the red-haired maiden. "But you will not bid against me for the other 3, will you?" "'Tis a bargain, sir," Katina smiled. Avery folded his arms across his chest and shook his head when Hop looked at him to increase the bid. "Too rich a price for my digestion," he said, and Hop looked in vain for a buyer in the rest of the crowd. None was foolhardy enough to go up against the governor's maid. Recently, they had been given a glimpse of his excellency's temper in open court. "The slave car is sold to Katina Vandervelita for the sum of 600 guilders," Hop sang out and bowed towards the carriage. Do you wish the chain struck off, lady? Well, at least he's being sold back into the estate where we're enslaved in, I muttered. Katina laughed. And have him brought for the mountains or sea? No, Hop. These soldiers will escort him up to the slave quarters at the residence. She glanced at Schroeder, who gave an order to a detachment of green jackets waiting under their corporal at the edge of the crowd. They elbowed their way forward, dragged Kat down from his block, and marched and led him away up the avenue towards the residence. Katina watched him go. Then she tapped Avery with one finger. Thank you. The next lot is Deary. Hop told them, reading from his notes. He is, as you see, another fine, strong specimen. 500 guilders, growled Avery, and glared at the other buyers as if daring to bid at their peril. Without Katina to bid against, the buyers of the other buyers were bolder. And 100! Slave auction. Never seen one of these before. They're quite intriguing, Tim said. Aye, they're all about the highest bidder, lad, Daniel said. How's that work, he asked. The one with the highest bidder gets the prize, but you have a minute to bid higher if you really hold that stock, Dan. The bidding went quickly to 1,500 guilders, with only the wagoner and Avery in the race. Damn and blast the cord! Avery shouted and turned his to catch the eye of his new, hovering beside the rear of the carriage. The bid is adjacent, you sir, Hop yelled. The wagoner, frightened of what Avery and his new crew were, bolted back to town. A cat bitch has his own crew. Smuggling a boatswain like him doesn't need a crew, Will said. The devil works in mysterious ways, Jeb muttered. Matsi, the two other slaves, were not to Avery and for well under 1,000. Prospective buyers in the crowd had seen the little drama between Avery and the wagoner, and none showed bidding. All three slaves were dragged away to Avery's new crew to the harbor. Matsi tried to escape. A crackle with a mallet marlinspike quieted him and his mates. They disappeared into the harbor. A successful expedition for you, sir. Katina smiled at Avery. Nothing would give me great pleasure, but alas, madam, I was lingering on sail in the chance of picking up a few prime lads. Now my ship lies ready in the bay, and the tide bid me away back to England. Avery smiled. We will miss you, sir. Your company has been most diverting. I hope you will call on us and remain a while longer when you next round dinner, he said. There was no power on this earth, no storm, ill wind, or enemy which could prevent me, said Avery, kissed a hand, and he left to the harbor with his crew. Schroeder glowered at him as he left for kissing a hand. There was perhaps forbidden romance going on between the two lovers. The carriage then rode on with Car trailing behind in chains. My God, it was quite the entertainment. I'm glad Car's still with us, Jeb smiled. Pirates back to work! You go hoot from behind. We all hopped down off the castle wall and sprinted back to the mason blocks and lifted up by hard ropes. Katina sat in the sunlight in a protected corner of the terrace out of the wind, nearly as Schroeder beside her. At the service, a slave girl poured the wine table with its decorations of fruit and flowers from Slow John's gardens. She asked with a purr in her voice. Cat is being bathed and fitted with a uniform, as you ordered, mistress. The slave girl answered softly. She raised him and smiled over the rim. Shall we drink to a swift? Indeed. He lifted his glass. A short, swift voyage through the bottom of the ocean for him, and countrymen. My dear Colonel, she smiled. How droll. But softly now. Here comes my new latest thing. 2 buckets from the car escorted Car onto the terrace. He was dressed in a pair of black trousers and a white cotton shirt full to encompass his broad chest and massive arms. Before her, Katina switched into English. In future, now when you enter my presence, and you will address me as a mistress, and if you forget, I will ask Slow John to remind you. Do you know who John is?
Yes, mistress.
Ka responded without looking at her. Oh, good. I thought you might be tiresome and that I would have to have you broken and tamed. This makes for the both of us. She took a sip of the wine. However, Governor Van went home with him when he sailed. I will need a new coachman. She turned to Colonel Schroeder. I have heard these Negroes are good with animals. Is that your experience also, Colonel? Madam, so close to their nature, they seem to have a rapport with all wild and domestic beasts. Schroeder nodded and studied Ka unheardily. He is a fine physical specimen, but of course, one does not look for intelligence in him. I congratulate you on your purchase. Later, I will breed him with one of our slaves, Katina mused. The slave girl went still, but her back was turned so they could see her face. Interesting to see how the black blood mingles with the gold. A most interesting mixture, Schroeder added. But how are you not worried that he may escape? I heard of his fighting skills at the docks a few days ago, and he is a translucent sage. A leg iron might be suitable for him, at least until he has been broken in. I do not think I need to go to such pains, Katina smiled. I was able to observe him at a length for a while. Like a faithful dog, he is devoted to that pirate gang and even more so to that horrible man, Jeb. I believe he would never try to escape, or either of them are alive now. Of course, he will be locked in the slave quarters at night with others, but during working hours, he will be allowed to move around freely to attend his duties.
Oh, that's so fucked up.
I am sure you know best, my lady. But I, for one, would never trust such a creature. Schroeder growled. Katina smiled at him and turned back to the slave girl. I have arranged with Governor Van der Vliet that Frederikus is to teach Ka his duties as a coachman and driver. His ship will not be departing to Amsterdam for another 10 days. That should be ample time. See to it immediately. The slave woman made a gracious oriental bow. As mistress commands, she said, and beckoned for Ka to follow her. She walked ahead now, down the pathway to the stables where Frederikus had drawn up the coach, and Ka was reminded of the posture and carriage of the young virgins of his own tribe. As the little girls, they were trained by their mothers, carrying the water gourds balancing on their heads. Their backs grew straight, and they seemed to gild over the ground as this girl did.
Your brother Athula sends you his heart. He says that you are his tiger orchard still.
Ka muttered. The slave girl stopped so abruptly that walking behind her, Ka almost collided with her. She seemed like a startled sugar bird perched on a brotea bloom on the point of flight. The day before in the castle dungeons, Ka had met a black man by the name of Athula, and they talked about the castle itself, the grounds, and that his sister Zucchina worked in the house as a slave maid. He hadn't seen her since they were transported here months ago, and he wanted Ka to relay a message for her. She was trembling. You have seen my brother, without looking at him.
I never saw his face, but we spoke through the door of his cell. He said that your mother's name was Astrith, and that jade brooch you wear was given to you by your mother on the day of your birth. He said that if I told you these things, you would know that I was his friend. Ka smiled.
Zucchina froze and clutched her jade necklace around her neck. Her black hair was braided neatly behind her head, and her beautiful firm features were still in a slave dress. If he trusted you, then I also trust you. I shall be your friend, Zucchina said.
And I shall be yours, Ka grinned.
Oh, do tell me, how is Athula? Is he well? She pleaded. Have they hurt him badly? Have they given him to Slow John?
Athula is puzzled. They have not yet condemned him. He's been in the dungeon for 4 long months, and they have not hurt him.
Ka said, also confused at it. I give thanks to Allah. Zucchina turned and smiled at him, her face lovely as the tiger orchard to which Athula had likened her. Ka understood Allah was her god from a tribe she had come from. I had some influence with Governor Van. I was able to persuade him to delay judgment on my brother. But now he is going. I do not know what will happen with the new one. My poor Athula, so young and brave. If they give him to Slow John, my heart will die with them, as slowly and as painfully.
There is one I love as you love your brother, Ka rumbled softly. He shares the same dungeon as my other comrades.
I think I know whom you speak. Do I not see him when they were marched into the courtyard, all in chains? Is he white, yes? Zucchina asked.
That is the one. Like your brother, he deserves to be free.
Ka frowned. Again, Zucchina's feet checked, but then glided onwards. What are you saying, Ka, my friend?
You and I together, we can work to set him free,
he said. Is it possible? She whispered.
A fuller was free once. He broke his jesses and soared away like a falcon.
Carl looked up at the aching blue Dutch colony sky.
With your help, he could be free again, and Henry and his mates with him.
They had come to the stable yard, and Frederigus roused himself on the seat of the carriage. He looked down at Carl, and his lips curled back to show teeth discolored brown by chewing tobacco. "How can a black ape learn to drive my coach and my 6 darlings?" he asked the empty air. "Frederigus is an enemy. Trust him not." Zucchina's lips barely moved as she gave Carl warning. "Trust nobody in this household until we can speak again." As well as the house slaves and the most of the furniture in the residence, Katina had purchased from Van der Velida all the horses in his string and the contents of the tack room. She had written him an order on her bankers in Amsterdam. It was for a large sum, but she knew that her father would make good any shortfall, for she was protected by Van. The most beautiful of the horses was a bay mare, a superb animal with strong, graceful legs and a beautifully shaped head. Katina was an expert horsewoman, but she had no feeling or love for the creature beneath her, and her slim, pale hands were strong and cruel. She rode with a Spanish curb that bruised the mare's mouth savagely, and her use to the whip was wanton. When she had ruined a mount, she could always sell it and buy another. Despite these faults, she was fearless and had a dashing seat. When the mare danced under her and threw her head against the agony of the whip and curb, Katina sat easily and looked marvelously elegant. Now, she was pushing the mare to the full extent of her pace and endurance, flying at the steep path, using the whip when she faltered or when it seemed as though she would refuse to jump a fallen tree that blocked the path. The horse was lathered, soaked with sweat as though she had plunged through a river. The froth that streamed from her gaping mouth was tinged pink with blood from the edged steel of the curb. It splattered back onto Katina's boots and skirts, and she laughed wildly with excitement as they galloped out into the saddle of the mountains. She looked back over her shoulder. Schroeder was 50 links or more behind her. He had come by another route to meet her in secret. His black gelding was laboring heavily under his weight, and though Schroeder used the whip freely, his mouth could not hold the mare. Katina did not stop at the saddle, but with the whip and the tiny needle sharp spur under her riding habit goaded riding boot, the mare pushed onward and sent her plunging straight down the far slope. Her fall would be dangerous, for the footing was treacherous and the mare was tired. The danger excited her. She revealed in the feel of the powerful body beneath her, and of the saddle leather pounding against her sweating thighs and buttocks. They came slithering off the screechy slope and burst out onto an open meadow beside the stream. She raced parallel with the stream for half a mile, and when she reached a hidden grove of silver-leaf trees, she reined in the mare and a dozen lunges from her full gallop. She unhooked a leg from the horn of the saddle, and a swirl of skirts and laced underlinen dropped to the air. She landed like a cat, and while the mare blew like the bellows of a sea and reeled on her feet with iron, Katina stood, both fists clenched on her hips, and watched Schroeder come down from the slope after her. He blew and galloped in. There, he jumped from the gelding's back. His face was dark with rage. "That was madness, miss," he shouted. "If you had fallen." "But I never fall, Colin," she laughed in his face. "Not unless you can make me." She reached suddenly and threw both her arms round his neck. Like a lamprey, she fastened on his lips, sucking so powerfully that she drew his tongue into her own mouth. As his arms tightened around her, she bit his lower lip hard enough to stop blood and tasted the metallic salt on her tongue. When he roared with pain, she broke from his embrace, lifting the skirts off her, and ran lightly by the stream. "Sweet Mally, you'll pay dearly for that, you little devil!" He wiped his mouth, and when he saw the smear of blood on his palm, he raced after her. These last few days, Katina toyed with him, driving him to the frontiers of sanity, promising and then revoking, teasing and then dismissing, cold as the north wind one moment and hot as the tropical sun at noonday. He was dizzy and confused with lust, but his desire had infected her. Tormenting him, she had driven herself as far and as hard. She wanted him now almost as much as he wanted her. She wanted to feel him deep inside her body. She had to have him quench the fires she had ignited in her womb. The time had come. He caught up with her and she turned at bay. With her back against one of the silver leaf trees, she faced him like a cornered animal. She saw a blind rage turn his eyes as marble. His face was swollen, his lips drawn back to expose his teeth. With a thrill of terror, she realized that this rage into which she had driven him was a kind of madness over which he had no control of. She knew that she was in danger of her life, and knowing that her own lust broke its banks like a river, she threw herself at him with both hands ripped at his breeches. "You want me to kill you, don't you?" "You bitch," he choked, reaching for her. "You slut. I can stand no more. I will make you..." She pulled him out through the opening in his clothes, hard and thick, swollen, furious red, and so hot it seemed to sear her fingers. "Kill me with this then. Put it into me so deeply that you pierce my heart." She leaned back against the bark of the tree and placed her feet wide apart. He swept the skirts high, and with both hands she guarded him into herself. As he lunged and bucked against her, the tree against which she leaned shook as though a gale of wind had struck it. The silver leaves rained down over them, glinting like newly minted coins in the sun. As she reached the climax, Katina screamed so that the echoes rang along the yellow cliffs high above them.
Stop. Okay, it's gone. Sorry, my face got so red. That's embarrassing. Maybe I shouldn't have put moans in the audiobook. I'm sorry, I just wanted to be realistic. Oh, goodness.
Katina came down from the mountains of the Dutch colony like a fury riding down on the wings of the northwest gale that had sprung so suddenly in the sunny winter sky of Denmark. Her hair had broken free from her bonnet and streamed out like a brilliant banner, snapping and tangling in the wind. The mare ran through like a lion. When she reached the upper vineyards, Katina put her up on the high wall and soared like a falcon. She galloped through the gardens, down to the stable yard. Slow John turned to watch her go by. The green things he had nurtured were uprooted, torn, and scattered beneath the mare's flying hooves. When she had passed him, Slow John stooped and picked up a shredded stem. He lifted it to his mouth and bit into it softly, tasting the sweet sap. He felt no resentment. The plants he grew were meant to be destroyed, just as a man is to die. He stared at the mare for a minute and rider and felt the same reverence and awe that always overcame him at the moment he released one little sparrows from this mortal existence. He thought that the souls who died under his hands as his little sparrows. The first time he had set eyes upon Katina van der Velida, he had fallen completely under her spell. He felt that he had waited all his life for this. He had recognized in her mystical qualities that his own existence, but he knew that she was a thing crawling in primeval slime. She was a cruel and untouchable goddess, and he worshipped her. It was as though these torments he held in his hands were sacrificed to her, as though he had laid them on her and she accepted them. He was moved to the point of tears at the thought of her. He blinked his yellow eyes and for a moment, "Command me," he breathed. "There is nothing I wouldn't do for you." Katina spurred the mare at full gallop up the driveway to the down from the terrace, gathered up the reins and led the mare to the stable. He spoke gently to the horse in the language of the forests.
She has made you bleed, little one, but God will lead you.
In the yard, he unbuckled the girth and dried the mare's steaming sweat with a cloth, walking her in slow circles, then watering her before he led her back to the stall.
See where spurs have cut you. She is a bitch.
He whispered as he anointed the torn and bruised animal.
But Ka's here to protect you.
Katina strode through the rooms of the residence, singing softly to herself, her face lit with the glow of her loving. In her bedchamber, she shouted for her nursemaid with the name of Zelda. Then, without waiting for the old war cry, she took her clothing and dropped it in a heap in the middle floor. The air of the shutters was on her body, which was damp and sweaty in the juices of her passion. Her pale pink nipples rose in halos as of goose flesh, and she shouted again, "Zelda, where are you?" The maid came scurrying into the chamber. "Sweet Jesus, where have you been, you lazy old baggage? Close the shutters. Is my bath ready, or have you been dozing off again in front of the fire?" Katina blurted, but her words the usual venom she spits out. She laid back in her perfumed water of a ceramic bathtub, which had been carted up from the cabin of a ship that had sailed in 2 weeks ago from France. She smiled warmly to herself. Zelda hovered around the tub, lifting the thick strands of her mistress's hair out of the scented, pinned them atop her head, soaping her shoulders with a cloth. "Don't fuss so! Leave me be for a while," Katina ordered. Zelda dropped the cloth and backed out of the room. Katina lay for a while, humming to herself and lifting her feet at one at a time above the foam to inspect her delicate ankles and pink toes. Then, movement in the steam-clouded mirror caught her eye, sat straight up. Quickly, she stood up and stepped out of the tub, slipped a towel around her shoulders, and crept to the door to her bedroom. What she had seen in the mirror was Zelda picking up her soiled clothes. The old woman stood now with Katina's underlinen in her hands, stains adorning it. As Katina watched her, she lifted the cloth to her face and sniffed at it like an old bitch scenting the entrance to a rat warren. "You like the smell of a man's ripe cream?" Katina asked coldly. At the sound of her voice, Zelda spun about to face her. She hid the clothing behind her back, and her cheeks went pale as ash. "You dried up old cow! When did you last have a sniff of it?" Katina asked. She dropped the towel and glided across the floor, slim and sinuous as an erect female cobra, and her gaze is icy and venomous. Her riding whip lay, she had dropped it, and she scooped it up as she passed by. Zelda backed away in front of her. "Miss," she whined, "I was worried that only your pretty things would be soiled. You were sniffing it up like a fat old sow, you truffle," and a whip arm flashed out. The whip caught Zelda by the mouth. She squeezed and fell back on the bed. Katina saw her, naked, and plied the whip across the back and arms and legs, swinging with all her strength so that the layers of fat wobbled and shook on the maid's limbs as the lash bit into them. "This is a pleasure too long denied," Katina screamed, her own fury increasing as the old woman rolled and wriggled on the bed. "I have grown weary of your thieving when your glutton. Now you vote me with irritate trespass into intimate areas of my life, you sneaking, spying, whining old bag. Miss, you are killing me. Good so. But if you live you're on board of lead a ship for Holland next week. I can abide you around no longer. I will send you back to the meanest cabin without a penny of pension. You can eat the rest of your days in the poorhouse." Katina was panting now, raining her blows on Zelda's head. "Please, miss, you would not be so cruel to your old Zelda. Your wet nursed you as a baby," she cried. "The thought of having sucked on those great fat tits makes me want to puke." Katina lashed out at Zelda, whimpered and cowered, her chest with both arms. "When you leave, I will have your baggage searched so that you take nothing that you have stolen from me. There will be not one single guilder in your purse, you lying crone." The threat transformed Zelda from a pathetic, wriggling woman into a woman possessed. Her arm shot out, and a plump fist seized Katina's wrist as she was about to strike. Zelda held onto her with a strength that shocked her mistress, and she glared at Katina's face with a terrible hatred. "No," she said. "You will not take everything I have from me. You will not beggar me. I have served you 24 years, and you will not cast me off now. I will sail on this ship, yes, and nothing will give me greater pleasure than to see the last of your poisonous beauty. But I will go, and I will take with me all I own, and on top of that, I will have in my purse the 1,000 gold guilders you will give me as my pension." Katina was stunned out of her rage and stared in disarray at her. "You rave lunatic! 1,000 guilders! More likely 1,000 cuts with the whip!" She tried to pull her arm free, but Zelda hung on with a mad grip. "A lunatic, you say? But what will his excellency do when I bring him proof of how you have been rutting with the colonel?" Katina froze at the threat, then slowly lowered her whip. Her mind was racing, and 100 mysteries unraveled as she stared at Zelda. She trusted this old bitch without one question, never doubting her complete loyalty, never even thinking about it. Now she knew how her husband always seemed to have intimate with her lovers and her behavior that should have been in secret. She thought quickly now, her impassive expression masking her outrage as she felt at this betrayal. It mattered little if her husband learned of this new adventure with Cornelius Schroeder. It would simply be an annoyance for Katina. She had not yet tired of the colonel. The consequences would, of course, be more serious for her new lover. Looking back, she realized just how vindicative Velda had been. All her lovers had suffered great harm once her husband knew about them. How he knew had always been a mystery. She must have been naive, but it had never occurred to her that Zelda had been the serpent in her bosom. Zelda, I have wronged you, Katina said softly. I should not have treated you so harshly. She reached down and stroked her wheel on the maid's chubby cheek. You have been kind and faithful to me all these years, and I would never dream of denying you that which you deserve. When you sail for Holland, you will not have 1,000 but 2,000 guilders in your purse, and my love and gratitude will go with you. Zelda licked her bruised lips and grinned with triumph. You are so kind and good, my sweet lady. Of course, you will say nothing to husband my little indiscretions with the colonel, will you? She asked. I loved you much, too much, ever to do you harm, and my heart will break on the day that I have to leave you, Zelda cried.
Oh, Jesus. This part? Oh.
Slow John knelt in the flower bed at the end of the terrace, his pruning knife in his powerful hand. As a shadow fell over him, he looked up and rose to his feet. He lifted his hat and held it across his chest, respectively. Good morrow, madam, he said in a deep voice. Pray continue your task. I love to watch you work. He sank to his knees again, and the blade of the sharp little knife flickered in his hands. Katina sat on a bench close at hand and watched him in silence for a while. I admire your skills, she said at last, and though he did not raise his head, he knew that she referred not only to his dexterity with the knife. I have dire need of your skills, Slow John. There will be a purse of 100 guilders as your reward. Will you do something for me? Madam, there is nothing I would not do for you. He lifted his head at last and stared at her with those pale yellow eyes. I would not flinch from laying down my life if you asked it of me. I do not ask for payment. The knowledge that I do your bidding is all the reward I could ever want.
Weird.
That night, it turned cold, and squalls of rain roared down off the bay to battle the windows and howl like jackals around the eaves of the thatched roof. Zelda pulled her nightdress over her ample frame. All the weight she had lost on the voyages from the east had come back to settle on her paunch and thighs. Since moving into the residence, she had fed well at her corner of the kitchen, wolfing down luscious scraps as they were carried through the high of the table in the dining hall, washing them down from a tankard filled with the dregs from the wine glasses of gantry and red wine mixed with gin and schnapps. Her belly filled with good food and drink, she made ready for bed. First, she checked that the window cement in a small room was sealed against the draught. She shuffled wads of rags into the cracks and drew the curtains across them. She slid the copper warming pan under the covers of her bed and held it there until she smelt the linen benign to singe. Then she blew out the candle and crept under the thick woolen blankets. Sniffling and sighing, she settled into the softness and warmth, and her last thoughts were of the purse of golden coins tucked under her mattress. She fell asleep, smiling. An hour after midnight, when all the house was silent and sleeping, Slow John listened at the door of Zelda's room. When he heard her snores rattling loud than the wind at the casement, he eased open the door noiselessly and slipped through it, the brazier of the glowing charcoal. He listened for a minute, but the rhythm of the old woman's breathing was regular. He closed the door softly and moved slightly down the passage to the door at the end. In the dawn, Zucchina came to wake Katina an hour before her appointed time. When she had helped her dress in a warm robe, she led her to the servants' quarters, where a silent, frightened knot of slaves was gathered outside Zelda's door. They stood aside for Katina to enter, and Zucchina had whispered, I know how much she meant to you, miss. My heart breaks for you. Thank you, Zucchina. Katina answered sadly and glanced quickly around the tiny room. The brazier had been removed. Slow John had been reliable. She looks so peaceful, and what a lovely color she has. They stood beside the bedside, almost as if she was alive. Katina came to stand beside her. The noxious fumes from the brazier had roughed the old woman's cheeks. In death, she was more handsome than she had ever been in life. Leave me alone with her for a while, please, Zucchina, she said quietly. I wish to pray for her. She was so dear to me. As she knelt beside the bed, Zucchina closed the door softly behind her. Katina slid her hand under the mattress to find the purse. She could tell by its weight that none of the coins were missing. She slipped the purse into the pocket of her gown, clasped her hands in front of her, and closed her eyes tightly, that the long golden lashes intermeshed. "Go to hell, you old bitch," she murmured.
All right, chapter 9. Chapter 9 and chapter 10 are so short, though. Start of September 1680, JabberWocky Estate.
May and Daniel and Finn sat in our cell while Tim, Will, and Jeb were in their cell a few doors down from us. We hadn't gotten a lot of time to speak with each other due to the constant work and the lingering of Hugo on our asses with those stone blocks. It has already struck into the beginning of fall in September, and already the work was getting harder and harder as we slipped away day and night and got fed barely in our cells. We've been hearing of Slow John's remarks from other slaves and workers in the yard, saying that he is coming for us to ask us questions, but we hadn't seen him in days. News travels fast in this place, and we found out that Katina's maid Zelda was murdered a few nights ago, without a burn or scratch on her. My thoughts is that the whore Katina ordered that Slow John to do the killing, Daniel said, shivering. That is a scary dog, but we haven't seen him yet. Maybe he won't show, Finn hoped. He will show. A voice rang out from the two cell doors down, echoing. I gazed at Dan and Finn, confused, and rushed to the bar door. I stuck my head out and peered down the cold, stony building lined with iron cells. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing. Yes, I am here. The voice rang out deeply, sounding almost exactly like Car's. And who is this? Daniel called out. My name is Velda. I have been hearing of your talk lately of such things, about the people in this residence and plans of escape. I would like to be of aid. I have been here for 5 months now, and my sister Zucchina is a slave maid for that whore Katina. Do you know her? He called. This man was a slave blackman I knew for what he was saying, but he also sounded close to my age. No, I don't know your sister, I responded. You're the Englishman Henry, right? He called. How did you know that? I called. I couldn't see him anywhere, only hear his voice through the castle dungeon. Everyone has been talking about you and your friends. They say you will free him out of here. That's the plan, I said. Hi, is your sister a tribe princess? Does she got firm hips? Daniel snickled. I elbowed him. No. Yes, she's a tribe's princess from the tribe we were abducted from. Why you ask? Velda wondered. No particular reason. Daniel muttered more to himself. I know this bay and harbor. We can get... Velda stopped talking and I heard footsteps ascend the dungeon stairs. I gazed to my left to see Slow John making his way to our cells. Many long days and tormented nights we had waited for this man to show to us, and now he is here. We started to imagine he would never come. Every single night when the darkness brought an end to our work and on the castle walls, we prisoners were brought and came shuffling in and out of the night back to the cells. The fall cold wind had been tightening its grip on the Dutch colony, and we were often soaked with cold rain and chilled to the bone. Every evening, as he passed by the gardens, he would gaze at us in those cold, dead eyes. One day, the surgeon, Dr. Czar, gave a look at Tim's slash and Daniel's musket pus cut to check it out. As soon as we were locked in our cells in the lower dungeon, we had 1 meal a day, scraping out the bowls with our fingers, and then dropped like dead men on the damp straw. Slow John stared at me, Dan, and Finn for a minute, not moving, and then went down to Tim's, Will's, and Jeb's cell and did the same. Silent, unmoving. It was as if we were still all in a trance. Suddenly, we heard the man Seer bang on the iron bars, alert to spring us away from this sort of trance. Up, you lazy cocks, before Bernard sends his dogs to rouse you! The man Seer Mason shouted. No mock can take me. Dan grinned and I grinned as they unlocked our cells and dragged us out. I saw Tim being pulled, and his limp was getting slightly better, but Will had to help him up the dungeon stairs into the light. We struggled to our feet and were thrown outside into the rain and wind. There, Bernard waited to greet us all with his 2 huge black horehounds, howling and lunging against the leashes. Some of the seamen had found pieces of sacking or canvas with which to wrap their bare feet to cover their heads, but even these rags were still wet from the previous day. Most, though, were barefoot and half naked in the gales of fall wind. As we worked on the castle wall, Slow John would make his round every day at midday. The men on the high scaffolding fell silent and all work stopped. Even Hugo Bernard stood aside as he passed through the gates of the castle. In his somber clothing and with the wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, he looked like a preacher on his way to the pulpit. "That man is a walking reaper," Tim groaned, lifting up a couple of small stones to the wooden pulley. "Aye, we can't let him bust us, gents," I said to all 7 of us. They nodded, agreeing. "We have to find a way to escape. We must make a well-planned escape," Finn added, and we all agreed. I watched Slow John then return back to the yard. The Sergeant Mansir ran over, jangling the keys. He opened the low door to the castle dungeons and watched the vulture descend down the staircase. All the men on the scaffolding roused themselves as they were woken from a nightmare. No man cursed or spoke. Even Hugo was silent. And once the low iron door closed, I turned my head away from that horrible man. "Come on, lads," I said. Interested in this man, me and my mates followed me across the yard. We gazed down the lower door into the cells. Slow John descended the staircase, Mansir lighting the threads with a lantern, and stopped outside the cell of a man. The sergeant drew back the latch to the peephole and Slow John stepped up to it. There was a beam of light from the high window of the cell. I couldn't see the man, but I could tell he was scared out of his wits. I saw the man peep his head out, and his head was white as a skull. His hair was dead black. "I've been expecting you," the man said, coughing until his mouth filled with saliva. He spat onto the straw that covered the floor. Slow John made no reply. His eyes gleamed through the peephole, fastened on the man. The minutes dragged on. The man was overwhelmed with a wild desire to scream at him. "Do what you have to do. Say what you have to say. I am ready for you." But he forced himself to remain silent and stared back at Slow John. At last, Slow John stepped away from the peephole and nodded to Mansir. He slammed the shutters closed. We all darted back to our workstations quickly, and I picked up an iron mallet, hammering in a stone block, while Tim held the rock steady. As I hammered, I looked behind me across the yard. Slow John crossed the yard again, with every eye on him. When he went out through the gate, men breathed again, and there was once more shouting of orders and the answering of murmur of cursing and comment. "Was that Slow John?" Will asked as he began to pull the rope upward to the wooden holdings. "He said nothing. He did nothing," Tim muttered. "It is the way he is, I think," Finn said. I heard the clank of chains as a raggedy old man stumbled over to us, hearing our talk about Slow John. "That is Slow John," the old black man rasped. "I have been here long enough to see him play the same game many times. He will wear you down so that in the end, you will want to tell him all he wants to know before he even touches you. That is why they named him Slow John." "Mary God, that stare. Has he ever stared at you like that?" Dan asked the old slave. "Not yet," the old man said thankfully. "How have you been so fortunate?" asked Jeb, worried. "I know not. I know only that one day he will come for me also. Like you, I know how it feels to wait." The old slave smiled slyly.
Chapter 10. All right, the last chapter, guys. The last chapter. Three weeks later, Sunday, October 4th, 1680, JabberWocky Estate.
We were all sitting on our cells, eating the dry bread we were given by the soldiers. It is October, and the fall wind was getting more heavy upon our bodies, and rain would hail down on our heads as we worked vigorously through the thundering day. There were days where the wind whipped until our skin was chapped, or the days where the sun baked our bodies to red, or days where the rain poured on us so hard it was as if we were sailing through a storm. We had lost many men working on the East Castle wall. We lost 2 pulleys, and the slabs came crashing down on top of some unfortunate souls. Hugo fed the remains to his dogs. It was a long, grueling work from the break of dawn to midnight. We were tired, beaten, and hungry every night, only surviving on bread and dried meat, salted by the sea. We had been here for about 2 full months now, and it has given us just enough time to notice the people in the residence. We have become very familiar with the grounds, learning that Carl was working as a coachman for Van der Velida and his stables. Van der Velida had returned from Amsterdam on the 1st of October after delivering the civil records of us pirates' crimes to ensure we would be here for an eternity. My heart ached for my mates, for we didn't deserve this life, and we were rightfully wronged. I learned Katina Van der Velida, the mistress of the mansion, was always floating around with that colonel and secret loving on each other. I was unsure if her master Van was aware of this affair, but he seemed to be swamped with work. The nervous clerk, Jacobus Hop, would be trailing by his side, always scribbling down notes as they strided across the courtyard during the days. I even spotted Athorda's sister once while working on the wall near the horses. She was a beautiful young woman with black braided hair, tan skin, and slim features, delicate soft hands, long legs, and gorgeous brown round eyes with fat pinky lips. Daniel had taken a liking to her, and maybe this was a time when Dan would find himself a lady. Slow John was always tending in his garden, sometimes with Katina. It had been a while since he has come to visit us in our cells, to stare at us in silence, but it was agony and suspenseful. Since our time here, we had started to construct a plan of escape, but we haven't gotten very far, watching and learning the guards' stations and placements, and seeing when they leave the armory unguarded. As we sat in our cells nibbling on the rye bread, Daniel called out, "So, Athorda, your sister, Zucchina, she prefer dance in a ball or walk through the gardens?" Me and Finn rolled our eyes at him. Athorda seemed puzzled. "She hasn't ever been to one of your English balls, as you call it. She does tribal dance when we have rituals." "I see. Well, tell her I'd be interested in learning her ways," Dan smiled. Athorda poked his head out of his cell. By now we had seen the black man a little bit, only seeing his head, which was black and bald. And his head was covered with rituals tattoos similar to Kaz. "I'll let her know," Athorda said oddly. "Oi, Henry, we haven't seen Slow John in some time," Tim added. "That's a good thing," Jeb nodded. "Maybe he's got tired of us." Will smirked. It was Sunday today, the Lord's Day, and I then heard the manseer and 4 green-jacketed soldiers come down the dungeon stairs. Trailing behind him was Slow John in his Puritan outfit. "Speak of the devil," Will laughed nervously. They all said nothing and stopped in front of Will's cell for Tim and Jeb. The Puritan man set his beady little eyes on William Stanley. Manseer rattled the iron keys. "Out!" his voice echoed. The manseer unlocked our cells, drug us out, up the stairs into the courtyard. It was cold, a gusty day as we stepped into the courtyard. "You 3, the manseer pointed at Dan, me, and Tim. "Take the west wall. You're working with the merchants. You 2 on the east wall. Now, Hugo is waiting," he gestured to Jeb and Finn. "What about me?" Will asked. Slow John focused his gaze on Will. Will gulped. "Take him," Slow John muttered softly. "What?" Will asked. The 4 soldiers grabbed Will and held him up as he struggled. "Let me go, you bastards!" he shouted. "Will, let him go, you fucks!" Jeb tried to intervene, but one soldier kicked him down. Jeb fell back, and me and Finn helped Jeb up as they began to drag Will away in chains that they attached to his ankles. "Lads, help! Help me!" Will screamed in fear as the 4 soldiers dragged him across the courtyard. Everyone had stopped working, even Hugo, to watch this ordeal. Although it was no longer raining, the clouds that hung low across was blue-gray, the color of an old bruise. The cobbles beneath my boots were shining wetly with the rain squall that had just passed. I tried to stop myself from shivering, but it was pointless. Jeb scrambled away from me and Finn. He clutched my cotton shirt. "Help him! It's Will! He's a young lad, he'll break!" I could see tears raining down Jeb's eyes and was surprised that a man of his toughness was crying. I wasn't judging him, for I felt for Will screaming in the background as he was dragged across the yard. I didn't know why he chose Will in the first place, and expected him to go for me or Daniel or Timothy. But in a way I felt relieved, but also terrible at the same time. I looked into Jeb's eyes. "I don't think we can do anything for him. I'm so sorry." "God keep you safe," Tim screamed to Will. "Stay strong." "Hold fast, Will," Jeb cried after him. "I will," Will screamed. Then we watched as they dragged Will towards the low door underneath the castle armory. Mansell led them through a door and down a staircase. At the bottom, he paused and knocked on the iron-bound door. Without waiting for a reply, he pushed it open and dragged Will through. William Stanley was aching with fear, and he even pissed himself to where the urine traveled down his wool pants. The room beyond was well lit, a dozen waxed candles flickering in the holders and the draught from the open door. To one side, Jacobus Hop sat at a writing table. There was a parchment and an ink pot in front of him and a quill in his right hand. He looked at Will with a pale, terrified expression. An angry red cumbuckle glowed on his cheek. Quickly, he dropped his eyes, unable to look at the prisoner. Along the far wall stood a rack. Its frame was of massive teak, the bed long enough to accommodate the tallest man with his limbs stretched out. There were sturdy wheels at each end with iron ratchets and slots into which levers could be fitted. On the side wall opposite the recording desk where the clerk sat, a brazier smoldered. On the hooks set into the wall above it hung an array of strange and terrible tools. The fire radiated a soothing, welcoming warmth. Slow John stood beside the rack. His coat and his hat hung from a peg behind him. He wore a leather blacksmith apron. A pulley wheel was bolted into the ceiling with a rope dangled from it with an iron hook at its end. Slow John said nothing while his guards led William Stanley to the center of the stone floor and passed the hook through the bonds that secured his wrists. Mansell tightened the rope through the sheath until Will's arms were drawn at full stretch above his head. Although both his feet were firmly planted, he was helpless. Mansell saluted Slow John, then he and his men backed out of the room and closed the door behind them. The panels were solid teak, thick enough for any sound passing through. In the silence, Hop cleared his mouth and read from the transcript of the judgment passed upon Henry and those of his crew in the court. His stutter was painful, but at the end he laid down the document and burst out clearly. "As God is my witness, William T. Stanley, I wish I were 100 leagues from this place. This is not my duty I enjoy. I beg you to cooperate with this inquiry." Will spat at Hop. "Why are you torturing me, huh? Why not Henry?" Hop struggled. "We were ordered to get him last out of his gang. You were the first chosen among..." Will did not reply to Slow John. Hop took up the parchment once more and his voice quavered and broke as he read it. "Question the first. Is Sir Henry Hartstone aware of the whereabouts of the mermaid discussed in court 2 months ago?" "No," Will said, still looking into those yellow eyes. "The prisoner has no knowledge of this mermaid of which you speak." "I beg you to reconsider, sir," Hop whispered hoarsely. "I have a delicate disposition. I suffer with the stomach." Will snickered. Slow John began with the rack.
His shadows close when he's around. The children shut their eyes and hear what some noise when all the children hang their heads down, down, down. Ushers on his way to town. He keeps his sights set straight and true. His idle hands won't flit or flutter, never does he slip or stutter. Still his mind is never sink away. Hey. Yeah, his shoes on the ground today. He needn't dirty up his hand. Help test your heart until your manic lost in endless streams. Your manic prey and not the one he finds. His passion's got you on his mind.
I worked on the scaffolding with Daniel and Tim by my side as I held down a wooden plank as I hammered in the nails with mallets on either side of me. We all kept turning our eyes to the lower door across the courtyard to see if Will would emerge or anyone would. There was no sound of movement from there at all. Jeb's heart was breaking knowing his mate was in there being beaten and racked. Jeb could barely focus on his work and got many whips from Hugo, the overseer. Suddenly, I saw the clerk, Jacobus Hop, scuttle into the yard. Light rain poured on our heads. I watched as he tottered an officer's hitching rope and hung onto one of the iron rings as though his legs could not support him. He seemed oblivious to everything around him as he stood gasping for air like a man freshly rescued from drowning. All work on the wall stopped, and even Hugo Bernard and his mason stood silent, gazing at the miserable clerk. With every eye upon him now, he doubled over and vomited on the cobbles. Boy, that's a nasty business. Daniel frowned, hammering the last nail. What of Will, clerk? Jeb shouted across the yard. Quiet, you pirate! Jeb screamed, slamming his leather lip across Jeb's back, making him tumble, groaning. Everyone in this piece of shit household will get theirs coming. I'm sure of it. I watched the clerk wipe his mouth with the back of his hand and looked around as though he was seeking a place to escape to. He launched away from the rail and set off at a run across the yard, up the stairs to the governor's quarters. One of the sentries at the top of the stairs tried to restrain him, but Hope shouted, I have to speak to His Excellency, and brushed past him. Nervous yellow belly, Tim snickered. I pray Wood is all right, Jeb sobbed. I placed a hand on his shoulder, as did Finn. I'm sure he is, Finn said, trying to be assuring. Hop burst into the governor's chambers. Vandervliet sat at the head of a long polished table. 4 burghers from the town were seated below him, and he was laughing at something that had just been said. The laughter died on his fat lips as Hop stood trembling at the threshold, his face deathly pale, his eyes filled with tears. His boots were flecked with vomit. How dare you, Hop! Van thunders as he dragged his bulk out of the chair. How dare you burst in here like this? Your Excellency! Hop stammered. I cannot do it. I cannot go back in that room. Please do not insist that I do it. Send somebody else. Get back in there now, Vandervliet ordered. This is your last chance, Hop. I warn you. You will do your duty like a man or suffer for it. You do not understand. Hop was blubbering openly now. I can't do it. You have no idea what is happening in there. I can't. Go! Go now or you receive the same treatment, Van screamed. Hop backed out slowly and Vandervliet shouted after him. Shut the doors behind you, you worm! Hop staggered back out of the residence as I watched him from the top of the scaffolding. Me, Dan, and Tim had finished filling the planks on the upper level, while Finn and Jeb had finished their work on the blocks of stone on the east wall. I watched Hop go to the little door and visibly brace himself. Then he flung himself through it and disappeared from my view of us silent watchers. We worked from the morning to the afternoon without a peep of the little door. Hugo had stood over us with his whip and gnashing canines as we cemented into the grey boulders into the wall under the light, cool rain. My arms ached, my head throbbed, my fingers cracked. We were exhausted. My belly rumbled and my tongue swelled. Man, I would kill for Marquis' cooking. Daniel smirked next to me as we filled in oil to the nails. Mine too, Tim added. I laughed softly as we worked. We were all looking at the little door across the yard, seeing if anyone would come flying out. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, the door opened and Slow John came out into the courtyard. As always, he was dressed in the dark suit and tall hat. His face was serene and his gait slow as he passed out through the castle gates and took the avenue up through the gardens towards the residence. That preacher man will not get a lick on me, Daniel said. Oi, look, it's that clerk, Hop! Finn shouted quietly to us. I turned around to see Hop rush out of the armory and across the main block. They came back leading the company surgeon, who carried a leather bag and disappeared down the armory stairs. That isn't a good sign, Tim said, worried. Jeb's face was pale. A long time afterwards, the surgeon emerged and spoke briefly to the man and his men, who were hovering at the door. The sergeant saluted him, and he and his men went down the stairs. When they came out again, Will was with them. He could not walk unaided, and his hands and feet were swaddled in bandages. Red stains had already soaked through the cloth. Will! Jeb shouted. Sweet Jesus, they have killed him. Tim said in awe as they dragged Will across the yard, his legs dangling. Will lifted his bloody head at all of us. He raised his hand in the air. He didn't kill me yet. He laughed. Will, stay strong, Jeb cried through tears. That evening, the 5 of us convicts were thrown into our cells. Will was, but in a different cell to where we couldn't speak with him. Me, Dan, and Finn sat on the hay beds while Tim and Jeb were in the other one. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeb, I muttered through the cell bars. It's all right, but when we make our escape, we're going to burn this place to the ground, and those living here along with it. Jeb snarled. From behind the shutters of a bedroom, Katina watched the tall figure of Slow John coming up the avenue from the parade. He passed out of her sight behind the stone wall at the bottom of the lawns, and she knew he was going directly to his cottage. She had been waiting half the day for his return, and she was impatient. She placed the bonnet on her head, inspected her image in the mirror, and was not satisfied. She looped a coil of her hair, arranged it carefully over her shoulder, then smiled at her reflection and left the room through the small door out the back veranda. She followed the paved path under the naked black vines that covered the building, stripped off their last russet leaves in the fall wind. Slow John's cottage stood alone at the edge of the forest. There was no person in the colony, no matter how lowly his station, would live with him as a neighbor. When she reached it, Katina found the front door open and she went in without a knock. The single room was bare as a hermit's shell. The floors were coated with cow dung, and the air smelled of stale smoke, cold ashes and burnt earth. A single table and a chair with the only. As she paused in the room, she heard water splashing in the backyard, and she followed the sound. Slow John stood beside the water. He was naked to the waist, and he was stooping over the water from the trough with a leather bucket and pouring it on his head. He looked up at her with the water trickling sodden hair down to his chest and arms, covered with hard, whimsically. Gladiator, Tina stated. It was not a question, for she could not see the answer in his gaze. I was expecting them to leave. Nobody else would dare come here, he said, and Katina blinked at this unusual address. She sat down in the low stone wall beside the pump and was silent for a while. Then she asked, "What do you call it?" The death of Zelda had forged a strange bond in him. In Triomacli, on the beautiful island of Celion, at the sacred elephant pool, stands the temple of Kali. I went there every day that I was in the colony. Kali is the Hindu goddess of death and destruction. I worship her. She knew then that he was mad. The knowledge intrigued her and made the fine, colorless hairs on her forearm mad. She sat there for a long time in silence and watched him complete his toilet. He squeezed the water from his hair with both hands and then wiped down those lean, hard limbs with a square cloth. He pulled on his shirt, then picked up the dark coat and where it hung over the wall, shrugged it on and buttoned it up to his chin. Last, he looked at her. You have come to hear about my little sparrow. With that fine melodious voice, he should have been an opera tenor. Yes, she said. That is why I have come. It was as though he knew exactly what she wanted, and he began to see hesitation. He told her what had taken place that day in the room below the armory. In no detail. He almost sang the words. In the terrible acts he was describing sounded as noble as from the tragedy. He transported her so that she hugged her own arms and began to rock slowly back and forth on the wall as she listened. When he had finished speaking, she sat for a long time with a blank expression on her lovely face. At last, she shuddered softly. You may continue to call me Kali, but only when we are alone. No one else must ever hear you speak that name. Thank you, goddess. His pale eyes glowed with an almost religious fervor as he watched her go to the wall. Without looking at him, she asked, why do you call him your little sparrow? Slowly shrugged, because from here onwards he belongs to me. They all belong to me, to the goddess Kali forever. Katina gave a small shiver at the words, then walked down the path of the gardens towards the residence. Every step of the way, she could feel his gaze upon her. Zucchina was waiting for her when she returned to the residence. You sent for me, miss. Come with me, Zucchina. She led the girl to her closet and seated herself on the highest lounge in front of her shuttered window. She gestured for Zucchina to stand before her. Governor Kalinkins often discussed your skills as a physician, Katina said. Who taught you? My mother was an adept. At a very young age, I would go out with her to gather the plants and herbs. After her death, I studied with my uncle. Do you know the plants here are different from those of the land who were born? There are some that are the same and the others are myself. Katina already knew all of this from Van, but she enjoyed the slave girl's voice. Zucchina warned, and I have an ugly mark. My skin bruises easily. Do you have a chest of medicines, one that will heal me? Yes, miss. Here, Katina leaned back and drew her skirts high above her knees. Slowly and sensually, she rolled down one of her white stockings. Look, she ordered, and Zucchina sank gracefully to the silk carpet in front of her. Her was as soft upon the skin as a flower, and Katina sighed. Ah, I can feel that you have a healing hand. Zucchina did not save of her dark hair or eyes. What are you? Katina asked. Zucchina's fingers stopped and then moved on to explore the bruise that spread around the back of her mistress's knee. I was born in the year of the tiger, she said. So my next birthday, I will be 8 years old. You are very beautiful, Zucchina. But then you know that, don't you? Katina smiled. The troll notion. Katina did not like this turn of topic. Tell me, is your brother as good looking as you? Katina wondered. Again, Zucchina's finger shook on her skin. Ah, that worked, Katina thought. She smiled and then asked, Did you hear me? Regretted having said it. She knew that it was dangerous to allow this woman to discover those areas where she was most vulnerable, but she could not recall the words. How old is he? He is 3 years older than me. Zucchina kept her eyes down. I need to fetch my medicines, miss. I shall wait for your return, Katina replied. Be quick. Tina lay against the cushions and smiled to herself at the vivid precision of images and the words that ran through her mind. She felt expectant and elated, and at the time restless. Someone's words sounded in her head like cathedrals. They disturbed her. She did not remain still a moment longer. She sprang to her feet and prowled around the closet like a wild animal. Where is that girl? She demanded, glimpsed at her own reflection in the long mirror and turned to consider it. Kali, she whispered. What a marvelous name. Secret and splendid. She saw Zucchina's image appear in the mirror behind her, the girl's dark beauty, a perfect foil of her own. I have the salve for your inquiry, miss. Zucchina stood close behind her, but her eyes were fierce. Thank you, my little sparrow, Katina whispered. You belong to me forever, she thought. She turned back to the sofa and Zucchina knelt before her. At first, the salve was cool on the skin of her leg, and then a warm glow sprouted. Zucchina's cunning. I hate to see something so beautiful. You love you, brother, Katina asked her. With reply, Katina reached down and cupped her hand under Zucchina's chin. She lifted her face and looked into her eyes. The agony made her pulse race. My poor little sparrow, she said. I have touched the deepest place in her heart, she exulted. As she removed her hand, she let her fingers trail across the girl's cheek. This hour I have come for Slow John, she said. But you saw me on the path. You were watching me, were you not? Yes, miss. Shall I repeat to you what Slow John told me? Shall I tell you about his special room at the castle and what happens there? Katina did not want to wait for the girl to reply, but went on speaking. When Zucchina's finger, she broke off her narrative to order. Do not stop doing, Zucchina. You have a magical touch. When at last she finished speaking, Zucchina was weeping. Her tears were slow as oil squeezed from an olive press. They glistened against the red and gold of her cheeks. After a while, Katina asked, How long has he been in the castle? I have heard that it is 6 months since he had came back from the mountains to fetch you. Such a long time, and he has not been tried, no sentence passed upon him. Katina waited, letting the moments fall. She spoke. Vandervelida was remiss, or was he persuaded by somebody, I wonder? But my husband is an energetic and dedicated man. He will not let justice be denied. No renegade can escape him long. Now Zucchina was no longer crying. She stared at Katina with stricken eyes as she went on. He will send a folder to the secret room with Slow John. Athula will be beautiful no longer. What a dreadful pity. To prevent that from happening. Mistress, Zucchina said, your husband has power. My husband is a servant of the company, a loyal and unbending servant. He will not flinch from his duty. Miss, you are so beautiful. No man can deny you. You can persuade him. Zucchina slowly lowered her head and placed it on Katina's knee. With all my heart, with all my soul, I beg you, miss. What would you do to save your brother? Katina asked. What price would you pay, my little sparrow? There is no price too high, no sacrifice from which I would turn aside, Zucchina said. Would you never hope to set him free? You understand that, don't you? Katina asked, gently. Nor would I ever wish that, she thought, for while the brother is in the castle, the little sparrow is in my cage. I will not even let myself hope that, Zucchina said. Zucchina lifted her head, and again Katina cupped her chin, this time with both her hands, and leaned forward slowly. Athula shall not die. We will save him from Slow John, you and I. She promised, and kissed Zucchina full on the mouth. The girl's lips were wet with tears. They tasted hot. Slowly Zucchina opened her lips, and like petals of an orchard opening to the sunbird's beak as it quests for nectar. Athula, Zucchina stilled herself with the thought of her brother, as without breaking the kiss, Katina took her hand and moved it slowly up under her skirts until it lay on a smooth white belly. Athula, this is for you, and for you only. Zucchina told herself silently as she closed her eyes and her fingers crept over the belly, down into the nest of fine golden curls at the base.
All right, those are those 3 chapters. Oh my goodness, getting intense. Oh, Well, that was chapters 8, 9, and 10. So I'll do another stream. I actually probably won't do one tomorrow. It depends on how I feel. It depends on if I have time. I had time today, but I don't know if I have time tomorrow. So we will continue probably with just chapter 11. Chapter 11 is pretty long, just like chapter 7, or maybe split into 2 parts. I don't know. But yes. Well, thank you for joining. What was your? I know one person hates Katina, so. But what was your part in those 3 chapters? Because here I just wanted to, like, when I was writing it, I not only wanted to escape from Henry's perspective, I wanted to kind of do something a little different, because it's been through Henry's perspective the entire story to actually get from other characters' perspective around the residence, so you just don't see it from a prisoner's perspective. You also see from the people living in the residence and households. And I thought it'd just add to the drama and stuff in the colony. So pretty fun indeed. And yeah. We'll probably do the next stream pretty soon for chapter 11. But yeah, character building, I really hate Katina. Oh, well, me too. She's a bitch. Everything sucks. You can die in hell. But yeah, it was really fun writing that section. Pretty hard write it just because I had to write different characters and stuff. But it was pretty fun. It's very intense. It's very intense. Indeed, it is very, very intense. It's a lot of drama, a lot of drama. So we will do chapter 11 next stream. Don't know when that will be, but yeah, I just wanted to include different characters and stuff in the colony, other than just Henry's perspective. But I'm not going to talk for long about that. I'm going to wait till after we get through the audiobook, sit down and talk after we listen to the last part about the story and future of it and stuff. So I'll keep pretty silent for that until we get to the audiobook. So thank you for joining my stream. Please leave a like and subscribe to become a jack-lantern, and remember to light those lanterns. And I will see you guys in the next Siren's Call audiobook stream. See ya.